Welcome, Barclay, to Metallarium Pages. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about Nothingness, this new album, Supraliminal, and more things related to the metal world. Starting with a common question about, I think, the always interviews, why the band delayed 4 years to release this new album? Because the whole case of that was released in 2019, and now 4 years later we have Supraliminal.
Yeah, that's we released our album, and then COVID lockdowns and restrictions sort of shut our band down after only being a band for about 6 months. Like, it was out, our first album was out for 6 months, and then COVID restrictions shut everything down all through 2020. And so we're writing the album during that time, and then 2021 rolled around, and then we started the band up again and sort of finished writing the album, and then we recorded the record early 2022. And then just working with Everlasting Spew to sort of fit into their schedule and whatnot, they weren't able to release the record until early 2023. So the record we finished writing it about 2 years ago, recorded it about a year ago, and then just because of scheduling and time and things like that, it couldn't come out until right now.
Okay. One aspect that I saw in the whole case of that is that you released the album in August 23 in 2019, but the first edition was in CDR. But then Memento Mori, or Raul from Memento Mori, was released on CD and original CD. So how do you see this aspect? Because before this 2021 release, I think no one knows Nothingness on the media and speaker. But since 2021. I know the band because I spoke with Raul. Raul told me this. You need to hear this band. It's very amazing.
Yeah, Raul was great. We self-released it in 2019 just because we wanted to get our music out. We wrote it and released it, and then slowly over time, more and more people found it, like Raul at Memento Mori, and then Barbaric Brutality, label out of California, repressed it to tape as well in I think late 2020, early 2021, somewhere in there. So yeah, it was just, we wanted to just release it and get our music out there, and then some really cool, labels and really plugged in music people kind of found it and then wanted to re-release it. So we were really excited to have our stuff repressed by some cooler labels.
Okay. And why this new album doesn't release by Memento Mori, and how you entered to speak with Giorgio from Everlasting Spew Records for this new album?
Well, Everlasting Spew reached out to us really early on, actually. In 2019, they heard the Hollow Gaze of Death, the first one, and they were like, "Hey, when you guys start writing a second album, talk to us. We'd be really interested in releasing it." And then, because of scheduling and stuff like that, Memento Mori didn't they had all 6 of their slots already taken up by the time we finished writing or recording our record. And so Everlasting Spew came in and they were like, "Well, we can do it." So just sort of, they've always been on the back burner, always been keeping tabs on us. And then when we got the second one done, they were like, "All right, if you guys let us, we'd like to put it out."
Okay. Other aspects about the two albums, talking about the Holy Gates of Death and the Supraliminal, is the cover arts in there, because the cover arts are really amazing. It's like both cover arts are abstract things. It's very difficult to understand what try to say with this cover art. So in this aspect, what is the main focus, talking about the lyrics and for the band? Because I read songs like The Ice Over Ash in the first album, but I try to relate with the cover art. It's very difficult because in space, a lot of people down there. But now with the second album, Supraliminal, it's like a head smash with a glass, something like that. I try to relate that. So Horrendous Incantation, one title, other Temple of the Broken Swords. That's very difficult to understand. So how do you describe the music related to the lyrics, to the cover arts, the title, etc.?
Yeah, so we try and mix a lot of different styles of metal together, whether it's death metal, black metal, doom metal, post metal, some grindcore and stuff like that. So with a lot of different musical elements, we wanted to have cover arts that had a lot of different things to be focused on. They're sort of abstract. Superliminal specifically is sort of a look inside. It's dealing with trauma. Like lyrically, a lot of it is about like going inside. And so we wanted an album cover that sort of showed what the inside of a person is tumultuously. So it's like inside of your head, like it's all crazy and fucked up when you're going through trauma or any sort of thing like that, but then also what the inside of a person looks like if you smashed it. So it's those two things kind of working together, where it's literally the insides of a person, but it's also sort of more metaphorically the inside. So that's what we were going for with the first one, or with the second one. And then on the first one, the album is supposed to kind of be a journey, and it tells a couple of different stories. And so that first record has two guys on the cover next to like a little campfire, and those guys are journeying through like a desolate landscape. And so while the covers are kind of complicated and weird, that's because we want them to be representative of the whole musical experience, which also can be kind of weird and, like just a lot going on. We have a lot going on in our songs, and so we wanted a lot going on our covers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one detail that I do not know with this new Superliminal is that you take a lot of influence from the dissonant, the big one created by especially into the death metal by Gorgus in this aspect. So what are the main influence that the band take for this Superliminal? Perhaps Gorgus, perhaps Demolish, or more bands, etc. No?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Alex is our kind of main songwriter. He's the guy that all the riffs start with. But all of the members of the band draw from really sort of eclectic things. There's no like main influence that we're drawing from. We're trying to draw from all of our influences, but yeah, everybody, Gorguts, and then like some of we all love Immolation quite a bit. Like the fact that they've stuck with their guns and wrote really kind of unique and interesting death metal over the years. Gorguts, Immolation, Morbid Angel, a little bit of Cannibal Corpse, like anything that stood the test of time, like that's kind of something that we certainly try and draw from. But then also, we're big fans of our label mates Alters, and they use quite a bit of dissonance as well. I'm a big fan. We're all big fans of Ulcerate, and so bands like Ulcerate and Alters kind of draw some of that dissonance out, and then some of Morbid Angel's more off the wall and weird leads and stuff kind of show up in our music too.
Okay. One detail that I didn't know the other aspect about this is that Alex played with a guitar with 12 strings. So it's a very unusual thing to the death metal. So how do you describe, because for me it's like, as you said, a lot of mixture there, grindcore, death metal, a little black metal into there, etc. But for you, how do you describe exactly the sound with this of 12-string guitar?
The 12-string only features on one song. We used it on Beacon of Loss, the like really long, slow, sad song that we wrote. And that was just an extra instrument that we added in order to try and really fill out the sound. We describe our sound as cauldronous death metal. We can throw a lot of stuff into a cauldron and stir it around. And so that's just, we've got a 12-string and a vibra slap and some synth. We take a few different instruments and just sort of like add a little bit of extra spice to the soup of our cauldronous death metal.
Okay. Well, we're talking about one aspect, because I think about one sound in the death metal. Correct me if I'm wrong, because I did know that Nothingness use a microtonal temperament. So, and just one or two bands used those arrangement into the death metal sound, because in the temperament, all the step size large and small, as well as musician rights, are reversed with the notes, the scales of these aspects. So major becomes minor becomes major via microtonal temperament, teaching a lesson that applies the deeply of life itself when very abstract things. So do you think this could be a new path of death metal in terms of classic sound?
Yeah, I mean, the best part about death metal to me is that it stayed both really consistent and is always evolving forward. Like you can always rely on the good old classic stomping death metal, and there's always going to be a band that still vibing with that sound, but there's always bands that are pushing it forward. And so, I think it could be something that shows up more often and sort of cements itself as a more of a mainstay in the genre.
Mm. Okay. With this aspect, now, I think this subliminal is very hard to understand. It's not an easy record compared to your influence, like Immolation, Cannibal Corpse, Gorgon. It's more easy to understand in if you have experienced in death metal, it's very easy. But with the super minimal, it's very difficult to understand one, perhaps two or three steps to hit to round, and very difficult to understand. So, but related to this, so what tried to say it into this album? So abstract music, because it's very related to the abstract music, especially when you hear the first chords of the creation, you have you use a little abstract things. It's very different from the other bands.
Yeah. I mean, our ethos is kind of just that we do what we want. And so when it comes to writing the music and coming up with riffs and stuff, it's just whatever ends up sounding good and feeling good to us is what ends up being used. And then so it's all like the writing process is really just sort of natural. We don't really go into it thinking out stuff where we're like, all right, let's make sure to get this, make sure to get this, make sure to get that. Everything just sort of naturally happens. And then when it comes to my lyric writing and stuff, I tend to try and get lost in the song and figure out. Al and I work as a writing duo. He writes the riffs and stuff, and then I listen to it and try and figure out exactly what his emotions were at the time, and then feel those, and then write the words that the song, has inside of it. So it gets convoluted, and I tend to write lyrics with like lots of layers of abstraction and a lot of like metaphorical and metaphysical kind of meanings and leanings behind them. But yeah, everything is just sort of happens naturally.
Okay. Well, talking about the subject of living influence and feeling what happens internally and externally for the musician. So many musicians say that they don't have a direction when you're writing music, as you told me, and are carried away by the feelings that they have in the moment they create, when they create the album, the song, or the music part. So for you, how do the parts of producing an album connect with the idea of substantiation of it? Could we say that the music is a concept thinking, or is a concept not thinking?
Sorry, are you asking what the concept of the
No,
music is?
when you create music,
yeah.
Could we say that the music is a concept? So it's a concept thinking. So you say this part is going to the second part, this riff going to the second part, etc. But or is a concept not thinking? So just write riffs and go away.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it all starts with that sort of no thinking. Because the album, or like our band name, is Nothingness, and so we kind of start from this like place of like quite literally nothingness. We don't really think about what we're going to do. We just start. That's kind of the creative process behind it. Like if I was to sit down to paint, I don't plan on painting anything. I just pick up a brush and start going. That's sort of the same concept with how we start riffing and how we start writing. And so yeah, it starts very loose, and then as we realize what it's like building towards, then we start refining it, and that's when we start thinking about it. So it starts really sort of natural, really sort of ephemeral, and then we hammer it and get it tighter and tighter into a concept until we've got it ready to be slotted into a spot on that album. That's one thing why, because it took us so long to make this one, we've had a lot of time to think about it, had a lot of time to structure it, and bring it from sort of that very loose place to a much like tighter and complete album.
And what are your opinion about some reviewers around the web say that this supraliminal is more like technical death metal, are not death metal? Are you agree with this concept, technical death metal?
I mean, anybody can think of it as they will. Like nothing really bothers me as far as like people having an opinion on music, because music is just a really subjective thing. And we just sort of think of ourselves as a death metal band. But yeah, if like, the guitar riffs are kind of tricky sometimes, but they're not really written with the intent of being technical, like there is no forethought of like, let's try and make as cool and hard of a part as we can to impress anybody. Like they just sort of happen. So like if people want to call it technical death metal or call it anything really, they can go ahead, because yeah, I've read pretty much all of the reviews that have been sent our way, and some people really like it, some people don't like it at all, and some people are just sort of confused by it, and that's just that's art for you. It can be interpreted multiple different ways, especially based on people's previous perceptions and like where they're coming from.
Okay, and to this aspect, how did the band react with the bad reviews, bad comments about your music? Because as someone I here, especially in my country, when I think in a lot of countries, not just my country, some bands doesn't take in this aspect very well when they have your music is bullshit. So, for example, and the band is very offended by this comment. So how did the band react to the bad comments?
I think you got to have thick skin in order to sort of put anything that you make out there into the world for other people to sort of absorb and judge. So we don't really get offended or take it too hard. Like there have been a few mean comments that have showed up on YouTube videos where people are like, nothing new here, this is stupid, like I can't believe anybody would pay money for it, and we're just like, oh, whatever, like if that's your opinion, cool. But because there's another comment, 2 comments down, that is like, yeah, this is one of the favorite things that I've heard this year. So for every bad comment, there's a good comment out there somewhere, and if you try and dwell on the negative stuff, you're just not going to get anywhere. We're confident in what we made. We wrote this album, we recorded it, and the entire time we were like, yeah, this is good, we like it. And that's what is ultimately important, is we like it, and we put it out, and if other people like it, cool, and if other people don't like it, whatever. That's kind of our outlook on it.
Okay. Oh no, we are living in a world that we are returning to the 40s and 50s when the people select just single to hear the band, the music, etc. We are now in a cyclic time. No? So if we try to relate this aspect with the new generations, which single are the best way to understand this album? Even as I said that, this album is very hard to understand. It's not easy, even for me, that I hear the death metal since the beginning in 1988, the first wave. Now then I hear them. So
Right.
even for me, it's very difficult to understand this. Even I like a lot the emulation. I have old CDs. I have old Gorgot stuff. Demil, when Demil is released, they're the only album, the unique album. I said, wow, that's amazing. But your album is very difficult to understand either way.
I think the best single to try and grasp the band is the 3rd track, Catapulted into Hyperspace. That song has all of the aspects that we kind of use. There's blackened parts, there's some sort of like chuggy parts, there's some sort of doomish parts, and there's like the lyrics on it are sort of the starting place where it's somebody trying to deal with their trauma, and it's it's not actually going to space, it's about like doing so much drugs that you're backflipping through your own subconscious. So that's like the catapulted into hyperspace is when you end up doing too much drugs, and then you're in a state between consciousness and there's sort of that like death of the ego and stuff. And so that's where the sort of heart and core of what the rest of the album sort of ends up being about. It all kind of starts inside of Catapulted into Hyperspace, and then builds out in through Temple of Broken Swords, which is about dulling your blade, and ultimately your body being, taking the motif of your body being a temple, and then dulling the blade through not taking care of yourself. And so then we end up becoming these temples of broken swords. So that's about a broken person. But to answer your question, Catapulted into Hyperspace is probably the best single to try and wrap your mind around what we were trying to accomplish with Superliminal.
Okay. One thing that you said a few minutes ago is that you have influence from Cannibal Corpse. Well, you are a new band, and perhaps you hear last year or perhaps 2 years ago that the Chris band said that the new bands is bullshit. So one of the influence said that the new bands are bullshit in general. They're not the same feeling that they got that they have in the 80s, 90s, mid 90s, or the beginning 2000s. So for you, what is your opinion about these aspects as you are a new band compared with the last things that this person said, that these all new bands are did into the metal are bullshit?
Yeah, Chris Barnes obviously is a like he has to be respected for what he did in those early Cannibal Corpse albums, becoming one of the first death growlers and really bringing the vicious lyrics and the grotesque album art to things. And so I think he was really going his own way at an early juncture of death metal, and now he's seeing a lot of bands copy what he did, 30 years later, and that probably is rubbing him the wrong way. He's crabby about people just sort of repackaging what he started or was on the cutting edge of. He was part of that early wave of death metal, and now he's watching old school death metal revival acts do a lot of the same things sometimes. I mean, I think that there's a lot of bands that are doing an old school death metal revival really well, but yeah, as a new band, if one older member of the metal community thinks all new bands are bad, then I think he just isn't doing as much looking into the underground, because I think there's a lot of young bands that are doing some really darn cool stuff, and maybe those bands just haven't crossed his path, and maybe he's just sort of stuck in a headspace that isn't productive, we'll say.
Okay. Well, I think the next question is going to why are you in what are you inclined to do death metal and no other styles? Because death metal is more than 30 years of existence now, since the first records in US, in Swedish, in UK, because that's the three important countries talking about the death metal in the 80s. So why do you decide to lean down to do death metal because in some ways, if you try to see this aspect, the death metal, the death metal new bands are already a little bit saturated with with a lot of productions, with a lot of singles, albums, EPs, etc. So why do you decide to lean down to this with this style?
Well, I think death metal can be so many things. You've got blackened death metal and death doom and some of these things. And all of our favorite bands, all the members of the band's favorite bands, are some form of death metal. One of my favorite bands is Dormant Ordeal out of Poland. They're sort of a blackened death. Some people call them a technical death metal band, but I think they're just a blackened death metal band that plays guitar good. And Crips is another one of our favorite bands, as in the death doom style. And death metal just feels like the genre that we've all loved for a really long time in different facets, whether it's the old school death metal of the early 90s or some of what the newer death metal has spawned. It's just what we want to do. It all boils back to we're just doing what we want to, where it's we want to write riffs like this. We love death metal, but we love lots of different types of death metal. And so ultimately we just write riffs, and we want to play shows where we can get up there and just pound and headbang. Black metal shows a lot of the times are theatrical productions or some sort of ritual and thing like that, and we don't really want to do live shows that are rituals and stuff. We want to go out there and just have fun, have a good time, all headbang together and have that camaraderie and whatnot. And I think death metal really is a opportunity to do that, as well as explore other styles.
Okay, we are very close in this interview, Barclay, and for that, what are the future plans that the band has for this new album? Perhaps a US tour, perhaps you some proposals to play a full tour in Europe, or who knows, Latin American tours, because you are very close to Mexico. In Mexico now are biggest festivals, Heaven and Hell, Mexico Metal Fest, Domination Fest, Monterrey Metal Fest, etc.
Yeah. Al, the guitar player of Nothingness, is in another band called Aberration, and they had a chance to play a Mexican death metal festival, and he said that it was a ton of fun. So if we had the opportunity, we definitely would. But right now, working with Everlasting Spew, we do have an outline of a European tour. It hasn't solidified enough to announce anything, but we're working on getting it over to Europe this summer. And then we're got a couple of shows that I can't quite announce or anything, but we're working on some stuff to get around through the States and whatnot. So we're just going to try and play as much as possible, but we're so early in the album cycle that I can't really like confirm anything, but we've got a lot of like stuff in the works for playing as many shows as we can, both in Europe and in America. And then, yeah, try to get down to either Mexico or get up to Canada and play a few other shows there too.
Okay. Well, no, one of the last questions. What is your opinion about now about the digital aspect? Because well, we have digital platforms like Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and etc. etc. But now, as you said, you said the physical stuff is very important to metal scene because that's why your first album release first in CDR, then in an original CD. Now you are more bigger stuff with the Everlasting Spear Records. So into this aspect, which rule first, the digital or perhaps still rules the physical stuff?
I think that's one really cool part about metal is how important physicals are. I think vinyl being our vinyl isn't going to be out until spring, but vinyl making such a big comeback overall is partially because of the underground death metal and underground metal scenes sort of keeping that physical medium alive for a long time, because members of Nothingness, all have vinyl collections or cassette collections and stuff. And so I think physical still is maybe it rules like true fans of the genre, true like people that are ride or die death metal still are buying physicals and are still really proud to have their collections and stuff. And, we spent a good bit of time designing our physical release here that's coming out soon. But I like the fact that digital makes things accessible so that people can just grab the Bandcamp app and pop it in their headphones on their way to work or something. So there's positives to both of them. I love physicals myself because it's such a personal thing. You can get so close to the band, but when you don't have, the time or energy to put on a vinyl or, carry a CD player around with you, like having that digital option is cool and good. So that's kind of my thoughts on that.
Okay. But now, what is your opinion about the metal movement around the world? Because as you can see now, we are living with in Stranger Things, Metallica plays one song. Then a lot of stuff. When in Sonic 2, there is a single riff from the Pantera, and a lot of movies. There appear more and more bands from the 80s and 90s. But what is your opinion about now compared to when the metal was massive? In the 70s and 80s when they full stadiums, all bands full stadiums. So what's your opinion now, the metal? I think we are reviving this new massive aspect into the metal.
Yeah, I think and on top of that, like there are certain subcultures of like rap and stuff that are using screaming vocals, and there are like artists that are sampling Slayer and things like that. And so I think the kids are getting introduced to metal in more mainstream ways than like certainly I was sort of raised in the early 2000s, and metal was not really super mainstream, I feel like, during that time. But now we're seeing that sort of like cross-pollination and that dimensional bleed where metal is showing up in places where it otherwise wouldn't. And I think that's really cool. And however people get into metal, like I don't really feel like trying to gatekeep or, be negative on these kids, that are like 15 or 16 and they hear Metallica and they want to try find something heavier. And whether they found it through Stranger Things or if they had an older brother that gave them a Metallica record, like however you come to heavy music, if you are supposed to be listening to it, like I think it's good that you get there.
Okay. Well, Barclay, the sad times arrive at this interview. I hope you enjoy this one like me doing this one. You are a terrific guy. Congratulations for the last album. It's a very great record. Difficult to understand as I said, but it's a great one. So perhaps do you want to add something to your Latin American fans and Metalero followers?
I mean, thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate talking to you. I'm just really glad that anybody's bothering to listen to our record. So anybody that listens to it, thank you so much. I appreciate just, trying to understand it because it is dense. We tried to pack a lot in there. But yeah, just Thank you.